to prevail. I also know that as an outside speaker, my job is to kind of parachute in and say, look, I go from classical school to classical school. I see what's going on. Here's my take on what's happening. But that never quite fits this particular community because I don't have to be here every day. So you may not have the same problems. So always, general truths have to be applied particularly. And I can't do that because I'm not in your particular situation. So if I can help with that today as we start to apply the bajillion things I've talked about. The other thing that's true is my job as a speaker is to present provocative ideas, ideas that will get you thinking. And as is always the case, remember an important thing I said, never act in a revolutionary manner. Suppose it's true, for example, that the cult of self-esteem has mostly harmed our students. Oddly, I think the cult of self-esteem that conservatives write about all the time and bemoan exists because other, deeper, underlying problems in the culture have created a generation with no true self-esteem. So when I teach gifted and talented students, everyone assumes my biggest problem will be pride. And in a superficial way, that's often the case. They've fallen into the cult of self-esteem. They know all the right things to say. I'm special. Everyone is special. It's cool if you're part of the team. I mean, the Lego movie, that makes sense to them. But often those verbalizations are just because other things in the culture, like the objectification of women through hundreds of advertisements that present false views of female beauty, have undercut their self-esteem. Now, as I said yesterday, you cannot cure a vice by a sort of opposite vice. The cult of self-esteem is bad. Self-talk helps, but it doesn't help at the right level, the right way. So people are correct to be critical about it. But notice if you take a hold of that truth and you ran around telling people, you're not as great as you think you are, in a kind of harsh way, that also won't help them. Because we still haven't gotten to the deeper problem. Why the cult of self-esteem came into being in the first place. Namely, we've destroyed our children's real self-esteem, their real place in Christ. So recall that everything I say is not the sort of thing you should act on immediately or in an extreme way. It's the sort of thing you should meditate on and, if true, implement slowly. Because rapid change, think Paul with slavery. The Bible is deeply abolitionist. By the time Paul is done in Philemon, the economic basis of slavery for practicing Christians is finished. But slavery, which was economic slavery, not chattel slavery or race-based slavery like the South knew in the United States, continued evolving away. Because immediate abolition in the Roman world would probably, and we know now through divine revelation, surely, have done more harm than good to the slaves, many of whom social status was higher than free men. Slave in Rome might have higher social status than a free man in Gaul. Slavery was bad, but it needed to evolve away. And so many of the things that we do in education are actually probably bad practices. But to remove them immediately might do more harm than good. We evolve away from them. We have a goal. Okay, so let me take questions. That's a little kind of ritual disclaimer, because my job is to drop as many bombs as possible. Let's see if I've dropped enough to cause us to have a long Q&A, or whether it will be a short Q&A and we'll turn to more content. So questions if you have them. And Chris, you have a microphone that you want to use? Okay. Give Chris work. Yes, ma'am. Right behind you, Chris.
What would be some of your practical thoughts on helping that student who doesn't have it move toward having more intrinsic hope?
Yeah, that's right. I know that yesterday, and so if I don't get practical enough, look behind Chris and I'll let you do a follow-up. I know yesterday probably one of the most difficult things I said is to give people a realistic view of their outlook. It's very hard as teachers to tell the truth about someone's capacity without clobbering them. That's why teachers or parents are about the only ones who can do it. You know, I went to a small Christian school, and relative to the men in my small Christian school, my graduating class was 8. I had a very good singing voice. And sort of relative to the general population, I'm the church choir director's dream. I show up, I have a decent tenor voice, I can kind of read music, and I'll cooperate. But relative to people who sing, I'm not that good. But somehow my school never let me know that, so I developed unrealistic views about my singing ability, which eventually in college, someone who knew me less well and had less of a loving relationship had to devastate me and just say, no, you kind of stink. You know, you're always a little flat. And there's no one's going to pay to hear you sing. That was the literal way I had to receive the news. Now notice, the news will come when people have unrealistic expectations. And it's very hard as a parent to be the one to deliver the news. Because we don't want to steal someone's dreams, right? Because we also know that if you shoot for 10, you might get 7. But if they shoot for 7, they might fall down to 5, right? Have you ever heard that? That's actually pretty problematic if the kid grows up thinking, I need 10 to be happy. Right? 10 is really the goal. Oh, I got 7. It's all well and good for you to say later, yeah, but you never would have gotten 7 if you hadn't shot for 10. You ruined 7 for them. So we need to, how do you do this practically? First of all, if you're going to give students guidance in terms of vocation or aptitudes, you have to have a long-standing relationship with them where there's a level of trust. So these conversations sometimes, sadly, take place after a standardized test. You know, you wait till they get to 11th grade, and what everybody knew turns out to be true. The PSAT is low. They're not going to Yale. You know, at Wheatstone, I met a woman once in Houston. I said, what's your goal? To go to Harvard Law School. This person was from an inner-city Houston school. They were barely articulate. They weren't going to go to Harvard as an undergraduate, let alone Harvard Law. Did I tell them that, by the way? So I'm going to get really practical. I spent the whole week talking about realism and trying to help students. Did I tell that young woman she wasn't going to go to Harvard Law? I did not. Why? Yeah, I'm not the one to tell her. I don't have a long-standing relationship. Now, eventually Harvard will tell her in what we used to call in my house the thin letter. You know, when you apply to something, there's the fat packet of admissions, and then there's the thin letter that says, we regret to inform you that. But it wasn't my place. It was the place of what people in her life. Her parents who weren't going to do it because they had fallen into the myth that if I convince my daughter to go to Harvard Law School, she'll go to UT and be happy. So how do we do this? We sit down and say, you know what? The world says you're physically unattractive, and you're struggling with that. God says you're beautiful and created in His image. But the world's judgment counts. It shouldn't, but it can harm you. It probably has harmed you. Here's your academic aptitude. This means there are some jobs that are open to you, and some that are not. Now, sometimes we're wrong, and you say this very bluntly. Sometimes you can smoke cigarettes all your life, and you live in your 90s. My favorite story from the country, it's a true story in West Virginia. Man died at 98. Wife came to the funeral, reported to my great-grandfather, I knew cigarettes would kill him. Okay. Right? But notice Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team, a fact I heard more times from bad high school basketball players whose dreams I tried to check, than any other fact, is not very relevant to most people. So I always say to a student, see your dream? Maybe I'm wrong. Get lots of counsel from people who love you and will tell the truth. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'd love for you to go to Harvard Law School. And I don't see it happening. Can you be happy with something else? Let me help you find that thing. So here's the problem. I mean, you're asking for sort of practical suggestions to how to implement this sort of thing. And the problem is, the only way to implement it is through long-term relationships with your students, which is why they should fall down on their knees and thank God they're at Trinity. Because you can have those long-term relationships. You don't have to deal with hundreds of students and scantron all their tests. You actually know them very well. I've been to your graduation. You have a lifelong relationship. Make sure that means you don't pull your punches about your actual judgment of their aptitude. Now, here's the other danger to small Christian school, and then I'm going to ask Chris to let you follow up, because this was preparatory to answering your actual question, so I want you to repeat it. I'm kind of building up, and I want to make sure I get your question exactly right. Here's the other danger of being in a small Christian school. I think my small Christian high school and the music people there, who were trained at Eastman, it was upstate New York, and so all Eastman graduates looking for work went into high school music programs, had lost track of how good you have to be to sing. Because you're in a small school, you know, your basketball team wins the championship in your division. This is what happened to my small Christian school. We went undefeated in soccer my senior year. The teachers themselves lost track of how good we weren't because they started to relativize, right? Now, that had a good effect in that we felt loved and comforted in a difficult world. But it also led us to unrealistic expectations of how good we were. So here's a harsh word. I think it's always good for Christians in small, excellent Christian schools to go visit other schools, talk to other students, go visit other colleges, talk to their honors college student kids. Otherwise, you might find, because you'll write glowing letters of reference, and kids who go to this kind of school tend to get high SATs. It's the reverse of what happens to kids in inner city schools. You might actually juice their SAT scores and their references to the point that they get into a school a notch higher than their actual ability merits. That happens, doesn't it? It's kind of like the punishment that occurs to some affirmative action people. Some people, because of race or ethnicity, will be invited to a UC who really belong in a Cal State. They'll go to the UC and flunk out or make very low grades and drop out. Retention is best measured in college, I can tell you this for a fact, by whether you got A's and B's your first semester. If you get A's and B's your first semester, you'll probably stay. If you don't get A's and B's your first semester, your odds of graduating are very low. That same student at a Cal State might have been a relative star, and so graduated and flourished and gone on to do good things. Be careful that because you're in a small school, you don't hype your kid into the next level of performance where they do worse than they would have done if you had a more accurate read on their abilities. I don't know how to get more practical than that, but it's to remind yourself you probably account for 100 points of their SAT score. I think that's probably pretty accurate. If they hadn't come here, they'd do worse on standardized tests. So be careful that you know what a good student really looks like, and a great student really looks like, and a bad student really looks like. The other thing is you probably have very few actually bad students. So be careful about that too. Though that tends to be less of a problem in a giving, sharing, hugging community like this. You're trying to help everybody make it. Okay, now re-ask your question, and I'll try to get even more specific on the very thing you want to know.
I was referencing the student who seems to not have hope in and of themselves.
Yes.
And how can we, as parents and educators around them, given the long-term trusting relationship we assume that we can have with them, how can we be pointing them toward developing or having that intrinsic hope for themselves?
Well, let's dialogue about this. I think it's the best way for me to answer your question, to make sure I'm hearing it correctly.
And I didn't mean for this to be an ongoing thing.
But this is, I'm so sorry about it. I actually enjoy this, and I think it's more useful to us than my just, blah, 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 because I'll make sure I'm talking about something at least one person wants to hear. And people can get snacks and things while we're dialoguing. I mean, Socrates just taught you one person. I'm not Socrates, you're not Glaucon. It's a degenerate age in which we live. We're the substitutes, but there you go. It seems like to me, I'm assuming you have a long-term relationship with this student, and you have diagnosed hopelessness in them. Before they got to Trinity, some of the things that we've talked about have stolen their dreams. Let me pick a simple case. They've so overconsumed entertainments and media that they're sort of numbed and bored, burned out. They don't think anything is awesome, especially themselves. They're just bleh. They have no ambition except to get through the day. They're kind of a burnout, and they're 16. That's a very tough, actually, situation. You could be an abused kid to go in the other direction. Why is it sometimes tougher to handle the first kid? In the case of the person who's gone through recognizable pain, you can actually help them blame their pain and come out of it. Whereas if you don't have something specifically awful that's happened to you, it's much harder to have something to push against. Now, I'm not saying it's better to have awful things happen to you. I'm just saying sometimes it's harder to cure this first kind of thing. So here's what I would do, practically. You know the student really well, and you find anything they're interested in. If you can find nothing that sparks their imagination, here's a hard word. Pray for them, you can't help them as a teacher. Sometimes we have to say that, right? Pray for them. This problem cannot be solved if you can never, as someone who knows them very well, with appropriate intimacy, you can find nothing that sparks their imagination. And I've had a few students like this. Just love on them and pray. What you have to do is find the one thing. I don't care if it's graphic novels, science fiction films, their boyfriend. So they want to discuss romance. Twilight, back when that was cool. Hook into that and build out of that interest to try to help them see the potential they have. Now, you can't stay there, but at least it's something where they have a sense of wonder and hope. It may not even be in themselves. Now, I'll give you a hard word. If you have this good a relationship with them, I bet you're an awesome teacher that kids like to talk to. They may have hope in you. So this is where it's appropriate to say, you don't believe in you. but I do. For a little bit, St. Paul says, follow me, be like I am. Ideally, we should always be like Christ. But sometimes we need Christ with skin on. So, very dangerous thing to do. I'd talk to your principal before you did this and make sure you're not falling into guruism. Say, I believe in you. Here's what I think you should do. Now, you have to be very careful then to set something achievable in front of them, not something foolish. Like, I believe you could go to Oxford, and you can't deliver that. Does that make sense? It needs to be something you actually can deliver to them. And often it's a very small thing like, I'm in charge of the school play. I think you could be the lead. Let's work on it. And this helps bring the student out of their shell. I've actually done that very thing a couple of times as a high school teacher. That's what I would do. Do you have a follow-up, or are you afraid I'd keep talking to you?
I'm actually getting more comfortable now.
Yeah, all right.
That's good. I think that's helpful and a good reminder for me to remember to set smaller, more achievable goals so that they begin to, again, for me it's all about the intrinsic, that they own it themselves. Set smaller, possibly achievable. It's still challenging, not too easy, but something that you feel and know of them that they actually could do.
Yes.
And still fumble their way through it like the rest of us do toward our goals.
Right.
But that nonetheless they at the end may have that some sense of accomplishment, and that could begin to build that maybe inner confidence.
That's right. And I want to stress this. Don't hand out promises you can't deliver on. So let me give you an example of a promise this school could deliver on. HBU's Honors College has to turn down half the people that apply. Our pre-med program is one of the best in the state of Texas, period. If somebody from Trinity, particularly somebody I know, calls and says, so-and-so won't look like a great student, but you should admit them to the Honors College in the pre-med program, you can get that done. Because I can get it done. And I believe in you. Now, what's the danger, Trinity? You better be right more often than you're wrong. Look, I've done the same thing for a student, and if you hit 50-50 on a flyer, I'm cool with that. I get how it goes. You're trying your best. But you start being delusional, and I'll think, and there are Christian schools in Southern California I think are delusional. I get phone calls from them all the time, both when I was in Los Angeles and now when I'm in Texas, saying so-and-so is awesome, and I just discount everything I hear. I think the teacher's awesome, but they have no clue about what their students can do. Now notice, though, you could promise that and get it done. You've got that much clout. I doubt you can call Harvard on the phone and get them in. So never promise something that you can't deliver. Now, if you think you can call Harvard on the phone and get them in, call Harvard on the phone, get them in, and then tell the student, I think I can call Harvard and get you in. Right? Never promise something you can't deliver on. I think I can make you a starting player on this basketball team. If you're not the coach, don't say that. All right. Any other follow-ups to that or different questions right behind you? We've hit a question patch.
It's similar. So I am a teacher in the Imago Dei program, and when you use the word realistic, I really appreciated Mrs. Cato's comment this morning, because you came in and we're speaking to how we have to put our own thoughts into check because we're influenced by our culture and what's happened.
Yes.
So then I guess I'm wanting to have a guide for putting thoughts into check, because what we may think is realistic may not be the truth, because it can go either way. It can be realistically low, where no one tries to do certain things, or unrealistically high. Yes.
Yeah, I've emphasized the one because I tend to work with gifted and talented students who have been sold unrealistically high expectations of what they can do. But one thing I love about this school, and by the way, HBU is a full-service school. We are the 6th most diverse university in the United States. I didn't say Christian school. School. A third of our students come from high schools in inner city Houston, where 900 on the SAT puts you in the top 5% of the graduating class. I taught a student this year who was probably functionally illiterate, who had straight A's from his high school. Now, what is the expectation of the culture for, I'll pick a different student, an African American male with 900 on the SATs from an inner city Houston school? It's not so great. Whatever people say loudly, what has he gotten really from the culture? His big ambition is to work for the equivalent of the Department of Motor Vehicles, because that's what he's received as his largest realistic ambition. In fact, that ambition is enormously too low for his actual potential. His limitations are entirely those that his school, his lousy public school, and the racist culture have put in his head. Now, since I can't solve all those problems in 1 year or even 4 years, I try to temper my enthusiasm, but obviously there's a case where somebody's vision is too small. So I started talking to him about becoming a lawyer and a judge, because he has the intellectual gifts to do both of those things. Now, I didn't start talking about being on the Supreme Court or going to Harvard Law. You know, U of H, go to law school. You can do it. Because I think I can deliver on that if he does what he's told. So, sure, if you're dealing with people that the culture views as disposable, learning challenge students, students that are not attractive as the culture counts attraction, we have to go the other way and say, God thinks you're physically beautiful. I didn't mean internally, physically beautiful. God thinks that you can do many more things than the culture thinks. And this is good. Let me try to help you know how deeply I feel this. My dad was hit, had bad vision, because he inherited horrible eyes. He was hit by an ice ball in the 1930s and was blinded in his right eye. Kind of got some vision back, and then his good eye, his left eye, failed. My grandfather sold everything he had, basically, put him on a train to Johns Hopkins, where he had one of the first laser surgeries, which utterly destroyed his eye. I mean, he doesn't resent it. Experimental science is, and the fact that you can get LASIK done is because men like my dad, boys, did high-risk surgery, some of which... So now, my 8th grade graduate grandfather has a legally blind child who can barely see well enough to read. He was told by every smart person, send Dayton to the Romney School for the Blind. Now, I'm not opposed to special training programs, but in that era, the Romney School for the Blind taught you to make license plates and crafts. My grandfather went out into his yard and prayed and decided he couldn't do it. So eventually, when he sent my dad to high school, first Reynolds in 400 years, and then to college, my 8th grade graduate grandfather sat and read his textbooks to him at different periods, because my dad had to keep going through surgeries. some of which would leave him unable to see at all. My dad graduated magna cum laude from Marshall and went on to seminary. Now, that's the opposite kind of situation, right? Where all the 1930s and 40s and 50s culture could see for my dad was selling pencils or some small job. But someone who knew my dad didn't get an unrealistic view. My dad didn't learn to drive. And he loves the ADA, by the way. The Americans with Disabilities Act has helped him so much, but he didn't have it all the way through school. And a good side to that was nobody made him any accommodations. None. He was expected to perform exactly the same way as everyone else. This had a bad impact on him, by the way. At one point I had to say, Dad, it's okay you can't play catch with me. Because he put himself down because he couldn't do that well, though he would try. So it had a bad side to it. The good side to it was that my dad just believed he could do what he could do. Now notice he didn't come to believe he could do what he couldn't do, given the culture of the time, drive a car. Though he's counting on Google to fix that for him before he dies. Does that make sense? So we have to, this is so important because students are both overestimated and underestimated. I'm sure most of you saw in the news report, I'd seen some of the studies before this, about kids who are cool in school. By the time they're 22, the cool kids are doing very poorly. Because the thing that makes you cool in junior high and high school turn out to be the very things that make you kind of dysfunctional later in life. Sort of opposite of the nerd syndrome. The nerds in junior high and high school most frequently are doing very well by 22, but it actually takes a long period of time. Why do I say that to you? Because sometimes we tell our nerdy high school students at 18, hey, good news, you're going to college, everything's going to change for you. But in fact, it doesn't change rapidly for undergraduates. For freshmen and sophomores, the cool kids from junior high and high school still tend to be the cool kids. It's a fading asset, but they keep it. The nerd is still the nerd. They're on an uptick, but it's easy not to notice it. If we oversell the speed of the change, the nerd will never get there. And the cool kid will think you were full of it and that their tactics still work. So we have to be careful on both sides, right? Don't oversell what you can do for a kid, but don't undersell it either. I hope that anecdote lets you know I really mean that.
I totally believe
Okay. Any other questions? We can just Q&A our way through this because hopefully you're learning valuable things. Yes?
One question that I had is in relation to...
I just want to say you talk right.
Yes, sir. And we had biscuits this morning.
Man, Jesus is Lord. I love America. I'm sorry, I grew up in West Virginia. I'm allowed to do that. I had the world's thickest Southern accent until I moved to upstate New York, and they were going to give me the lead in the 5th grade play because I was a pretty good actor, but the teacher said, with your accent, it'll be hysterically funny. So I turned on the radio in 5th grade and drilled the accent out of my head. There is a problem with that, however, in that I accidentally turned on Canadian radio. We were in upstate New York. So I have Canadian vowels with Southern rhythm patterns, which means I used to have students in grad school who would say, I get it, you're Swedish. No, I'm a West Virginian who talks like a Canadian. I mean,
We
do you
would
hear it?
say-
You hear the Canadian vowels? They're
We
there.
would say, bless your heart.
Yeah, bless my heart. You're on your way to telling me I'm bad. That's not good.
Okay, my question is in relation to entitlement
Yes.
and those with no self-esteem. So you have a huge gap there, and we want to hit somewhere in the middle with contentment.
Can I pause you? I think, given our culture, you should assume all your students have no self-esteem, including the kids that feel like they have entitlement. They go home, unless they're narcissists, and think, I stink. Everything I've been told about being awesome and special is a lie. And when I ask them to write realistic poetry or realistic novels. You have a nice kid who's not being abused at home. And they'll write about awful things. Because awful things are real to them, not their actual good lives. So just pause you to say, you should assume everybody's in the self-esteem dumper. They have first world self-esteem problems. But that doesn't make them less real. How do you not solve them? Through happy talk. It has to be through tangible accomplishments that are meaningful. Not through getting a trophy for being a lousy soccer player. That's part of the cause of the problem. Okay, so go ahead.
So I guess my question then is, how do you see the correlation if they've been given everything, they don't see the hope, the waiting for, how can they see the desire, need for a Savior and the correlation of their relationship with Christ to their actual contentment?
The only thing that I have found helpful is to warn them against boredom. And it's a reason I spent some time with boredom. What I'll say is something like this. Do you struggle with being bored? If they say yes, then I know I've got them. Because we know how to cure boredom. Meaningful pain. Meaningful pain. People experiencing meaningful pain get better and are never bored. Now, the problem with athletics is it's a decent way to give harmless pain and pain that brings some benefit, namely physical fitness. But a kid also may come to see this isn't deeply meaningful. This is why service projects like you do at Trinity and getting people involved in meaningful pain, meaningful suffering, meaningful sacrifice is absolutely critical for every kind of student in this culture. That's the only way I know to do it, and the only way to motivate it is to say something like this. Is Christmas less exciting and fun to you now than it was when you were 8? If it is, there's no reason to think that by the time you're 50, my age, the problem won't have grown worse and now have spread to many things. Things that were enjoyable to you, you'll be burned out on across the board. And what happens when you're my age and you're burned out on almost everything? You'll have to do ever more extreme things to have a good time. Many of which will harm you meaninglessly. So, that's the only thing I know to tell you. But notice here at Trinity, there are so many service projects. Now, here's a warning about service projects. They must matter. Too many student missions trips. I had to grow up with these. So I'm going to give you the truth. But not from the students on the mission trip, from the recipient of your aid. I'm from Appalachia. And we'd have Christian colleges all the time send people to help us. You know what they never did? They never brought Shakespeare. They dug ditches. Shoot mercy, that was the one thing we knew how to do. The second thing was, this actually happened to me. My friends and I were hanging out with this cool kid from a Christian college. And then, in the denominational newspaper, 4 months later, I was a precocious 8-year-old. I started reading about her summer with socially deprived children. Oh, that was me. I was the socially deprived child. If you've never read about yourself as a socially deprived child, you don't know how used you feel. So notice our service projects have to be meaningful. That is, are you doing something for someone that they could not do for themselves, where your help is actually needed? It isn't gratuitous. Where all the benefits of the project accrue to the person doing the project, and it's almost like those of us who are poor are doing you a favor. Now, we're actually kind of happy to do that. I got to be kind of sanguine about Christian college mission trips to Appalachia because, bless their heart, we could help them. I mean, they would come and they were kind of burned out and they needed meaningful pain, and we gave them as much meaningful pain as we could. We'd hide our good books and we'd get all Southern and, oh, you have an automobile. And it was just awesome. You could just pour mouth forever, and half the time they'd leave you cool stuff you didn't have to pay for. So that was okay, and we felt like we helped them, bless their hearts. Now, that's what you have to be careful that you're not doing. Do you see that? And I would guess, let me not put a figure on it, the majority of student trips that I've worked with have not helped the people particularly that you went to help. They've helped the people that were being sent. That will be felt by the kids and defraud them in the same way that they've been defrauded by other oversells. I'll give you an example of a successful student missions trip. When communism fell in Mongolia, Mongolians were intrigued with all things American. So I took a group of Biola students to Mongolia to be rent Americans. And they just went from school to school answering questions about their long-term relationships with Britney Spears. That was always the first question you got. Do you know Britney Spears? No, I don't. And then they thought you were a fraud. You know, it's just, what are you doing in Los Angeles if you don't know Britney Spears? But we went as sort of rent Americans. We didn't do jobs for Mongolians that Mongolians should have been doing. Like when I went and spoke to the philosophy department there for Campus Crusade, I was a kind of rent-a-brain. But I went and gave a paper on Plato's view of the human soul, which is what I think about as a philosopher, and we had philosophic dialogue, and I got to insert some Jesus-y things, and that was good. I did something in Mongolia that I do. I didn't enjoy flying to Mongolia. I didn't enjoy staying in the Chinggis Khan Hotel. It wouldn't have been my first pick. I think I helped Mongolians, and they helped me. We dealt as peers. I had some meaningful first world suffering. It wasn't great suffering. I did have a toilet blow up next to my head in the Chinggis Khan Hotel. If you've never had a toilet blow up on the other side of a wall, you don't know smell. And I've used West Virginia outhouses. Any other questions? Does that make sense? It's the only thing I know to tell you. Yes, ma'am, right here.
So you talked about one of the false hopes being our consumerist culture. And yet a lot of our kids who come from Christian homes, go to churches, go to a Christian school, their big hope is to get into a good college and get a good job. how do you keep their mind focused on God's kingdom, eternity, things that really matter, as opposed to what our culture and even what we're telling them?
Yeah, you have to stop telling them that. Here's what I know. You'll get maybe what you really want, but you'll never get in your students what you only officially want. What do I mean by that? Again, to tell you personal stories, but it's the only way I know to go. Here's what I know about my mom and dad. To the point of annoyance, Father's Day is coming up, right? Right now, if I called my dad on the phone and said, "What do you want for Father's Day?" he would say, and I quote, "2 boys who serve the Lord," unquote. Now, here's the deal. He meant it. When I turned down a free ride to the University of Dallas to do Great Books education, to go to Bible college, to do street evangelism because I was out on the roof and I thought God wanted me to, he was cool. Because it was consistent with my doing what? Serving the Lord, even if I made a dumb mistake, which I think I might have. Though I have to say, I ended up weirdly doing Great Books education by way of street evangelism. I don't know how that occurs, but it did. My dad, I walked away from faith in my early 20s, might not have gotten what he prayed for and really wanted. But I know this, if he had said that with his mouth, but we had all known he really wanted us all to go to alma mater, university, Marshall University, and go to law school like he didn't, that's what he would have been most likely to get. So ask yourself this question, Trinity. I know what Liz thinks. I mean, I know you well enough that I know you want kids who serve the Lord to graduate from here. But ask yourself if that's what you really want. Because what you really want is what you might get. So I have no solution to you. You see, I think it's fine to advertise, we're an awesome school, we'll increase your SAT score, and we'll get you into Yale if you can get into Yale. If you don't really passionately mean it. My dad, I got into Harvard Divinity School. If I had gone there, I didn't want to borrow the money, so I didn't. If I had gone there, my dad would have been cool with that, too. He was an anti-intellectual, you get the point? But he didn't care. Except in the happy way. He was proud of me, right? Yay, let's have some cake in our house. Anything, cake. Actually, it's pie. Anything is pie. Boom, pie, strawberry pie, bam, let's celebrate that. We'll have a party for anything if we're Reynolds. But I knew he didn't care that much, so that when I didn't go, because he didn't want to borrow the money, and University of Rochester was free, cool. But when I walked away from faith, he agonized over it. So you have to ask yourself, do you really wish that a student who thinks about going, I won't pick HBU, to APU or Biola, in your heart of hearts, do you wish they wouldn't make that choice? In your heart of hearts, do you feel more gratified if they pick the shinier choice? Notice then they shouldn't have picked you, K through 12, especially when the school is starting off. You'll get maybe what you really want. Notice the marketing words. This is why I'm comfortable with them. The marketing words, as long as they're true, aren't going to harm your kids. Because what will they come to? Oh, they could get me into Yale, but what do they really want? For me to be a gentleman and to serve Jesus. Oh, and I get into Yale, they're happy about it. Do you see the difference? And I can't fix that in you. Because nobody in here is going to go to an interview with the administration here and not say the right thing if you want to work here. And it's easy to fool yourself about wanting the right thing. So I tell the nice little story about my dad. It's very rare for me to have a parent leap to their feet and say, you know what, that isn't really what I want for my kid. I actually... If you had become a street evangelist instead of going to school for a free ride to become a professor, I would have been ripped off, man. I would have thought that was the worst thing ever. They'll get what they really want. Maybe. Because kids have free wills, right? So I can't help you with that. What do you really want? What really excites you when your students do it? I'm not talking about being happy, right? If you guys win, you guys have won a lot of sports championships according to the walls I go by. Shoot, it doesn't mean it's true, right? Our journalism department, I made them take them all down. We had, I'm not making this up, hundreds of awards on the wall from like 1963 when the school was started. As far as I could tell, they were all like most improved sucky small school newspaper. So he just took them all down, like, what in the world? I don't get this. But the point is, if we win an award like that and we want to have a party and we're happy for our kids, that's great. The thing is, kids will know what really made you happy. And if they love you, they'll try to do that. So what do you really want for your students? I'm really asking, what do you really want? Do you still have the microphone?
Well, my daughter is about to go here next year.
Right.
My husband works here. I actually work at a public school. What I want for my students, personally, as a public school teacher, I'd love them to come to the Lord. But
good.
On
they
the
might.
other hand, I'm a divided mind. You know, I work for the public school, so I also want them to go to
Are we
higher
being
education.
taped? Can they see her face? They cannot see her face? On the tape? No, I don't want anyone to know her name. Here's the good news. Here's the good news. You're not of divided mind. Oh, go ahead. What are you saying, Liz? I don't want to get her fired. No, it's just like the advertising.
I have tenure, so.
Yeah, oh. Yeah, but didn't California just decide that you're done? I mean, it's all going down for you. Here's the truth. You don't have a divided mind. No one does. Not really.
True.
Your students are more likely to get saved because you're there and that's what you really want, and everything else is blah, 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 like Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar. The question is always, are you Nebuchadnezzar's man or woman, or God's man or woman? Because you can work for Nebuchadnezzar and placate him. My favorite verse nearly in the Bible for educators. Anybody had a Bible? Like an electronic Bible, some kind of Bible? All God's children should have Bibles. Somebody loudly read. It is the important verse in the book of Daniel. The last verse of the first chapter of Daniel. It's going to answer your question, I promise. It's just your public school should fire you, really. Because you're a subversive. Yeah, loudly.
And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus.
And Daniel what? Even to the first year of King Cyrus. Whenever I give that verse to students, they correct me. I mean, Daniel's full of such awesome stuff. Lions' dens, weird beasts that should be turned into cartoon animals. I mean, it's just, woo! But the most amazing thing in Daniel is, read it again.
And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus.
Okay. You are fundamentally Jewish in an anti-Jewish world. And without compromise, you stay in the system for 70-odd years. Now, my students always raise their hand and say, yeah, but miracles happen. But it's the Narnia problem. The kids say to Prince Caspian, in Prince Caspian, man, we love coming to Narnia. Cool stuff's always happening here. It's one big adventure. And Caspian says, we don't love your coming to Narnia. I'm paraphrasing. Because if you have to come, things are messed up. We have hundreds of years of normal time, and then you come. You see, biblical history is thousands of years, even on a young earth view, and there are pockets of miracles. If you took all the miracles in the Old Testament, you'll notice that if you eliminate the Exodus and Elijah and Elisha, they're almost all gone. Which means there are hundreds of years of normal time. Daniel, count them. The lion's den, maybe the food test, depending on whether that was an indirect or direct miracle, and the ability twice to interpret dreams, if I'm counting it correctly. How many miracles? 3, 6, let's just say 10, in case I'm low. That means every 7 years, only a miracle could save him. But it's probably more like every 20 years. And God delivered. Though sometimes the miracle that saves you is martyrdom. Remember yesterday. Mostly, what did Daniel do? He endured. But when I was a kid and my Christian school taught me to dare to be a Daniel, I thought that meant get out on a limb and get saved. What it meant was get out on the limb and sit there for 70 years. Endure. But notice the trick about being Daniel. How did he do on the exam that Nebuchadnezzar gave him? How did he do? A+. He knew astrology better than surrounding astrologers. That's what he was quizzed on. Evil stuff. Not math and science and American history, folks. He was quizzed on evil pagan religious beliefs, almost none of which he thought were true. The next time you have a parent or a student in this school that says, why do we read these pagan books and master them? Ask them this. Are you more likely to live in a country where David is king or Nebuchadnezzar? Your kid. And if they say David, they shouldn't come to school here. Because they're wasting their time. They just do the Bible thing, and then the Bible will be effective, and that's what you need to know to make the culture go. That's not the world I live in, even in Texas. So notice that the public school, if they were smart and really secular, would find you out and fire you. If they mean their secularism. But lots of principles in the secular system aren't really secular themselves, and they give lip service to separation of church and state while breaking it every way they can. Then we've had principles that give lip service to your religious freedom, but what do they really mean? I'm here to advance secularism every way I can. Oh, but you're free to be a Christian. That's why I don't want your name on tape. That means Liz should find the people who are giving lip service to the mission here, but really want to work at a Tony Hogwarts for Christians, and fire you. We have a preamble at HBU and a 10 pillars vision that the boss wrote. Nobody tells me they don't like it. Because if you tell me you don't like it, you're not going to get hired. In fact, if you're smart, you memorize it and worship it. I love the 10 Pillars vision. And they should. It's just awe-inspiringly perfect view of Christian higher education. Then the question is, do they mean it, or do they just want a job to teach math? Yeah, I'll say the 10 Pillars thing, whatever, and then I'll just go teach my math class. They will corrupt us by their competence. The more competent they are, the more corrupting they will be. If you're a very good teacher, secularists should fire you first of all. That's what Lenin understood about Elizabeth Romanov, right? Her first of all. California should go to war with you. Right? Because you don't like them, do you? Do you? Do you love your union? Do you belong? Yeah, you have to. Do you pay dues out of your paycheck? Do you like that? They should find you. And if I ran the union, I would. Trust me. Trust me now. Yes. Oh, here's who she should hire. People whose primary motive is the mission and vision statement of this school, and oh yeah, I teach literature. My primary joy is, Susie's serving Jesus. Oh yeah, she's on the Supreme Court. Hooray! I'm not saying not to be happy. Does everyone get that? We won the state championship! Yeah! Okay, we're done with that. But you go on having a happy glow because your kids are more likely to serve the Lord, and you just think about them doing that. And any day you're sad, you think, we may not be very good at much, but our kids love Jesus. Did everyone feel the difference? It's the drama teacher, surely I'm not the only one to have a drama teacher like this, who was in it to do plays. And they just, the play's the thing! And in their head, they're on Broadway. Just, whoa! And they usually get an awesome play, having destroyed the entire school to get there. And all the kids. And they go, and their moment of glory is when their version of Sound of Music is the least lousy version in Southern California. And that, yes! And then there's the person who has an awesome play. Yeah. Go. No, then there's the person. Yeah, I'm a drama guy. That's why I picked on you. Then there's the person who gets that amount of quality out of their students, but they're happiest that the kids flourish. They know they kind of mock themselves. Yeah.
If you've ever been to one of his plays, you know.
We know the answer to that. Oh, man. Why is everybody picking on you? Are you the Chris Lee of this school? I see. Yeah. You'll work out of that position someday. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on to Thanksgiving? We'll take a break right after questions and let you go to the potty, and then I'll run through the last things I have to say to you. Are we totally out of time? Okay. What time are we supposed to be done? 11? Okay. Is that an evangelistic 11 or actually 11? Okay, actually 11. It's the good Lee. Hey, bad Lee, the good Lee has a question.
I feel like the answer to this question is going to be something along the lines of Christ, but that just feels too...
The answer
right?
is
It's too
love.
much. Sorry if my question's a little meandering.
As if my answer won't be a little my answer will be a lot meandering.
Okay.
Yeah.
This school is not free, as public education is free. And you mentioned the marketing for the school. A lot of the parents here
Government schools aren't free. You just don't feel the payment. So go ahead. And never call them public schools anyway. They're government schools. The public doesn't run public schools. The government does. Go ahead.
A lot of the parents here are making huge sacrifices to keep their kids here.
Yes.
And it seems like some of the way that we encourage them to keep their kids here is making promises about education. Whether it's intentional or just that's what's heard. And so I feel like the teachers end up in this uncomfortable position, especially at the end of the year when grades come due, and they're not being able to deliver on Yale as a freshman student. How can the student end up at Yale if this is the grade that you're giving them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually faced that for most of my career.
So there's this part of that, and then my other question related to it, your discussion on courage yesterday. You were talking about how your mother let you be outside creating this incredibly dangerous treehouse, right? And you could die, and we shouldn't be...
In fact, I did die several times, yeah.
He's cat in 9 lives.
Yeah.
We're supposed to pursue virtue for Christ's sake.
Right.
We're supposed to... we're supposed to be presenting that in our own lives and allowing our kids to see it. And we're supposed to be encouraging it in our children, and we're supposed to be encouraging it in one another as we as a community of believers aim to create men and women of virtue and Christians, disciples. So I was just wondering how you speak to that when we do want these lesser goods of good careers and
Yes.
productive members of society, and I do think a secondary aspect of this school is they're going to be better able to read books and interact with big ideas and to be culture changers. But how do we keep our focus on the thing that we should at least be most that should be at least closest to our heart, even if that thing itself we maybe can't deliver on that either, because at the end of the day, Christ is the only one who can change hearts.
You know, I know the answer to that for this school because I know that it comes up in senior thesis. We talked about it a little bit. Notice you're never selling something that's a lie. It would be bad if you did, right? What you're saying is, if your kid has a certain capacity, we make it more likely they'll get there. I think that's true. I absolutely, I've been doing this my whole life. This is my 31st year of teaching. I started when I was 20. I absolutely believe in the quality of your product. It measured that way. So it's not a lie. But that's why it's so important that we have parents here. That we educate parents along with students, and we're constantly saying, even if nobody hears it, what do we want at graduation? 15 graduates who serve the Lord. If we keep repeating that, I believe that most of your parents will accept it. If we develop a relationship with the parents as much as with the students, then at the very least, let me imagine an imaginary situation. They get to senior thesis, and their senior thesis is a B-. Is it possible to get a B- on your senior thesis? All right, if I were a parent, I would say, oh man, it's senior year. You just blew my kid's GPA. Their 3.8 might have gotten them into pick your favorite UC. The 3.65 that you just saddled them with won't get it done. Change the grade. Now, let's imagine such a circumstance could take place. Because trust me, I get this in my office all the time. At a college level, I have students who call and say, I dropped out of college my freshman year, but my parents think I'm graduating next week. Can I walk? The answer to that is no. The bill's going to come due for you Saturday. Now, here's the problem. A kid tries and tries and tries to achieve at a certain level. You help them and help them and help them. They're a good kid. They're a decent kid. They've done well. But relative to the awesome kids you have here, they're a B-. Now look, just like we celebrate our victories, there's no way that's not bad news. It's perfectly fine for a parent to pop off right away, try to defend their kid for like a week, feel the sad. Because everyone thought they were going to Irvine, and now they're not. Because no matter what you said to them repetitively, they didn't hear it until then. There's nothing wrong with that, just like there's nothing wrong with being happy about achieving a lesser good. It's perfectly natural to be sad about discovering you're not going to achieve a lesser good. But if you've worked with people all this time, what I would say, if I were the principal or the administrator who ultimately got this, is we told you this for 4 years. We meant it. Your kid's getting a B-, but you ought to be proud of them. Not proud of the B-, go home and have the sad. But then say, you know what, fundamentally, you're a decent kid. You turned out exactly the way a parent would. And in fact, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I've been deluding myself. I would have been a B- in this circumstance. I probably would have been a C-. So you overperformed the family's ability. Well done. Now, I think you underestimate your parents if you've worked with them for 4 years, 6 years, 12 years, repeating this, educating this. They'll do that, a lot of them. And a few, you'll discover, have been paying lip service to the mission of the school, and their kids have heard what? What the parent really wants, and both the kid and the parent will betray you. And you have to accept it. Because they didn't mean to be, but they've been subversive to your values all along. And pray for the kid. Yes?
So in that situation,
I assume it's hypothetical. In this hypothetical situation that has never occurred yet, maybe.
yeah, in that particular hypothetical situation, let me give you an example, thank you, of our community in that. So wouldn't quite say it like that, and that kind of conversation occurs. And again, this goes back to like what I was saying earlier. It's not an or thing. Because we communicate certain things that we're doing doesn't mean that we're still not pursuing purpose, wisdom, virtue, and courage, and that those things are happening as a result of pursuing the very hard thing. And the fact that our kids might get a good SAT score, I agree, because they're here, and that might encourage that. And they could go to something or beyond what they thought or what could be in that. But in that situation, you take that conversation, very hard conversation.
Yes.
And say, basically, no, they were at capacity. And sometimes those conversations take 2 or 3 conversations, because even if the parent might have said, knowing that that student performed at that capacity all along, it's still very painful and sad because they had hoped for more.
Yeah, and my guess is that particularly in the case of a super hard-working kid, at a nice school like this where you guys are rightly pretty huggy, the thesis grade is often a better reflection of their outside of the school abilities than their SAT score or their overall GPA. Because it's kind of a culminating, okay, this is where you're at kind of thing. Like you've overachieved. And there's nothing wrong with there's no, in one way, no such thing as overachievement. But there are some things that sheer hard work can't do. Namely, they can't make me C.S. Lewis. I can't write like C.S. Lewis through sheer hard work. Does everyone understand that? It might take sheer hard work to become C.S. Lewis, but I couldn't do it because of a gap.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so for this, say, hypothetical situation.
Right. If it ever occurs.
Yes, if it ever occurs, say this particular child received that, and it, for that child, first of all, our senior thesis for some of our students, it finally is the place where they're faced with, for all of them, whether they are potentially going to be a C.S. Lewis
Right.
or not, the hardest thing they've ever done,
Right.
which is meaningful pain.
Right.
And so in this particular, say, hypothetical situation, this family accepts the no, you have a furthering conversation, and you continue the prayer, and you continue the relationship gratefully. And then when we see, say, this particularly hypothetical family, because of the relationship and the culture, then we move on. But not knowing, because the no could have meant a break in the relationship.
Right.
But if we do believe in purpose, wisdom, virtue, and courage at the whole time, then you have to at times be willing to say no.
Yeah.
And hope that it can continue, but sometimes it doesn't.
That's so true. I mean, what you're saying is so true because you did the best you could to communicate your real values all the time. Does that make sense? You were constantly saying, this might happen. Look, we're having an open discussion where parents are here, I assume, and we're having an open discussion that this might happen. We're not hiding the football, in other words, and then springing it out on people senior year and saying, ho, ho, ho. But you're right. Even despite all that, people will still, bad news is, let me tell you, when I call somebody on the phone and say, your HBU interview went well, we're going to hire you to be a professor at this school, I've never had that conversation go poorly. It's not true. I had it go poorly once. The person turned out to be kind of psycho. And the good news was we didn't hire them as a result of the way they, oh man, we made a mistake here. But other than that one circumstance, I have never called anyone on the phone and told them they weren't getting a job where that was a fun call. However well they received it, it just was no fun. Right? I reject you. That's really what I'm saying to them, isn't it? But not as a human being. But we confuse our jobs with our humanness so often that, and I don't have a relationship with those people, so you hope they have a pastor somewhere.
Well, and two, part of it is, I mean, even like what the gentleman was saying last night, I mean, we're always, if we're not hopeful, if I don't go into every single conversation with a measure of hope that the Lord can, then I need to fire myself.
True.
If I don't believe that every child can possibly pursue for a measure of ability to where they're at, and we help them, or every, whatever it is, and don't believe, then I need to not be here.
I so agree with this. This is why I love this school. Let me say to the drama teacher, where are you, drama teacher?
You scared him. He left.
Yeah. It's the weird world. I did, till very recently, a high school play every year. And here's the weird world I have to live in, and Hope can tell you that this is true. I always think we're going to be utterly awesome. And no, we won't be. Does everyone get the duality of that? Like right through their performances. I think we're great. I think they're great. But I know I laugh at myself when I go home. This sense of self-irony is the key to keep hope from becoming delusion. But you're right, I'd rather hire a hopeful professor that needs a little bit of irony than an ironic person that I have to give hope, because I've never succeeded in the second task. Disappointing the hopeful, man, that's pretty easy. So I agree with you, you're totally right. Everything you just said is right. If you get to the point where job here is, you look at a 6th grade class and you say, first world problem, losers, kids from LA County, can't take it anymore, quit before they fire you. Because you're not a bad person, you're just burned out. Go get help, quit, get a new career, do something else, hooray. But if you look at your group of people and say, I swear to you, I'm going to go teach apologetics, in my heart of hearts, I will hope that I'm dealing with the next C.S. Lewis. That's in one way unrealistic, though I'll tell you, Mary Jo Sharp and Holly Ordway now work for me. I met them in an MA apologetics class. I had 3 days with them, and I said, I will hire you someday, in my head. I didn't tell them that, because I couldn't guarantee it. But I thought it, and I did it. And I think every student's going to become Mary Jo. But I know they won't. And I'm okay with them when they don't. Because I love them when I'm a good teacher. So don't bother telling me that's contradictory. Of course it is. We live in a fallen world, so what should be isn't. Since I can't know for sure your actual capacity, in which direction will I always err? In the direction of hope. Knowing that hope often disappoints. If I lived in an unfallen world, my hopes would always be exactly achievable by you. But trust me, burnout, hard to cure. Too much hopefulness, life will cure.